Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. As you can see on the map, I've gone back in time to January 20th. I'm going to start from January 20th and fast forward to our current date. We're looking specifically at the fighting that is taking place in and around the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, which soon may be the Russian city of Bakhmut, depending on what occurs on the battlefield. Now, the fighting that is taking place both in the fields and trenches in the urban areas around Bakhmut has been described as some of the most fiercest fighting in all probability since the Korean War and going back to World War II. So again, the level of violence that we're seeing, and as I talked about before the conflict even started, as I reviewed the prospect of war between two industrialized nation states, Russia and Ukraine, just how nasty this war could get. And indeed, if you have had the opportunity to go on Telegram and some other sites and watch some of the video footage, some of the drone footage that exists out there, some of the gun camera footage that has been provided by both the Russians, by the Ukrainians. This is an incredibly brutal battle. We're seeing the widespread use of drones and technology, but at the same time, we are also seeing pitched battles and at times hand-to-hand combat taking place in these trenches and buildings in and around Bakhmut. So we're going to fast forward again January 20th to kind of where we are now, where you can kind of see what the Russians are exactly trying to do. And I don't know what the military goal of the Ukrainians are as they continue to throw forces into the fray to try and stop the Russians from taking Bakhmut. But this has become a pivotal point for both sides at this point in terms of who can say they defeated the opposing force. And here we go. We're going to fast forward again, January 20th to present date today. And you can see the Russians moving from the south, pushing from the south, southwest, looking to envelop Bakhmut from the south, specifically pressing towards Shachiv Yar. Then in the north, the Russians start additional operations to the north of Bakhmut as well. And again, each time that you see the Russian territory seizure, this area turn red or turn gray, again, incredibly vicious fighting that is taking place between these two sides. And then that about does it, and we are now where we're at. And as we speak, heavy fighting continues. We continue to hear about the Russians bringing in now regular military units as opposed to using some of these Wagner forces that they have been using in and around Bakhmut. In other areas, we continue to see very heavy fighting that is taking place near Volodar, down here to the south. Again, I've talked about how it looks like we are seeing large reconnaissance in force by Russian forces. We have heard, obviously, you have heard on the news that reportedly the Ukrainians engaged elements of the Russian 155th Marine Brigade. It sounds like that Marine Brigade quite possibly took some casualties. Some reports indicate that up to a battalion set of Russian vehicles were left abandoned and or destroyed on the battlefield and operations near Volodar. And again, we are continuing to see the real-time intelligence provided by the U.S. military in terms of identifying large maneuver groups of Russian forces as they try to operate in for instance, southern Ukraine. This is very flat ground. This is perfect areas where the more advanced U.S. sensor systems have the ability to identify these Russian maneuver groups, these battalion tactical groups, or however the Russians are launching operations. That information is then transmitted directly to the Ukrainian military, in which HIMARS are then called in for very precise strikes on some of these maneuver groups. And obviously it's just not HIMARS, there are other systems as well. Some new footage has also been released in which we're seeing the Ukrainian military apparently using NLAWs. These are the next generation light anti-tank weapon system that has been provided by the British for the most part, thousands of these systems. But it looks like the Ukrainians are using these systems against actual troops in the field. Not sure how the sensor device is able to identify that it is over an individual soldier, and I'm not quite sure what we're even seeing is an NLAW. It's difficult to say, but it does appear that what was being used again against these open troops, and it does appear that at least the warhead sensor identified in at least 2 to 3 of these cases that they were over troops, and it detonated basically on these troops in the field. But again, not sure if it was an NLAW, hard to say what weapon system it was. It looked like some sort of anti-tank weapon system that was being used, a missile, obviously. But it was the footage is out there for you to see for yourself. But the fighting continues near Volodar. We do believe this is a reconnaissance in force by the Russians, seeing if they have the opportunity to launch further operations from south to north near Volodar. And we'll probably continue to see those attacks take place. We have not yet seen the full Russian offensive start to take shape yet. Again, it looks like the Russians are probing Ukrainian lines, and it looks like the Ukrainians again have decided not to plan on any sort of counteroffensive given the strength of Russian forces that have been moved up to these areas. So very, very interesting to see what is happening right now. The other issue at hand is the recent Russian airstrikes and missile strikes that have occurred throughout Ukraine. We know at least one of these strikes, more interestingly, was a fixed-wing attack. The Russians utilized apparently 2 Su-24Ms against targets near Odessa. We have not seen lately Russian strike aircraft operating near Odessa. Usually if the Russians go after targets in Odessa, they had been using cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones, what have you, fired out of Crimea or ships in the Black Sea. This is the most recent event in terms of the Russians deploying fixed-wing aircraft against targets in Odessa, and I believe up to 4 bombs were dropped by Russian forces on targets near Odessa. The reason I say that the Russians have not been using fixed-wing aircraft is Odessa is home and has stationed near Odessa a very robust air defense network. There are S-300s, there are Buks, in all probability. There is as well Western-made systems as well, such as the ground launch AMRAAMs and other systems. And more importantly, as the Russians vector aircraft into Western Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, the Ukrainians, for the most part, are not activating their radars. They are relying on real-time data and information from U.S. aircraft, AWACS, other systems, other long-range radar systems mounted on these aircraft to identify Russian aircraft as they enter Ukrainian airspace. That real-time information is then transmitted to the air defense unit, and then they're able to launch their missiles. If the Ukrainians were to activate their ground-based radars inside of Ukraine, the Russians have the ability to target those systems with anti-radiation missiles. So this is one advantage that the West has given to the Ukrainians, meaning the Ukrainians at times don't have to turn on their radars, and thus Western nation states flying over Romania, Moldova are able to see these Russian aircraft and then again transmit that data, probably in real time with data links that have been provided to the Ukrainians, and then the Ukrainians are able to launch their air defense systems. And that's what is happening. That's why the Ukrainians have continued to negate Russian air supremacy. The Russians have had a very, very difficult time operating, especially west of the Dnieper River, over Ukraine. Because again, the United States and other European nations are giving that information directly to the Ukrainians, where the Ukrainians don't have to turn on their radars. So we're continuing to watch this possible Russian offensive that is starting to take shape. We continue to see very, very heavy fighting taking place all along the eastern Donbass. Again, some of the most brutal fighting that has been seen since World War II, Korean War, is happening right now in this area of operations. The worst case scenario for war between Russia and Ukraine, again, two industrialized nation states, is taking place right now. And again, the prospect that this could escalate into something greater and wider is omnipresent. And we'll continue to monitor, report. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.